to the Crypto Blue Hour. We got myself and Eric here, and this week what we want to chat about is we're going to kind of do something a little bit different. We're not going to talk as much about current events as much as we want to talk about a high level, some user questions that we got. So my sister's in law school. She spoke to some of her peers, and they were asking some really high level questions that I think are a fabulous place to start. They also asked about legal regulation, which we won't touch on at all. But I think that some of the high level things are really about sort of where do I get started? How do you sort through all of these different options, meaning what we've spoken about the last 3 episodes, and then mining. I think that that's a really interesting, nuanced conversation to have, which is relatively simple. And so, yeah, that's kind of how we want to get started. Eric just got back from a little vacay, and anything you want to add?
No, if I sound a little stuffy, it's because I got a sinus infection. But other than that, I think that's a great idea. There's so much things that people don't know coming into the industry. So I think fielding some of those questions is a great idea.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, it'll be, hopefully we can keep this one less than 40 minutes, like hopefully around 20-ish. But I think that, like, when it comes to where does a complete novice get started, this is going to be a little bit controversial, and you might not, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this, not only on what I say, but also, yeah, exactly. I'm interested to hear not only your answer, but also your take on my answer. So, like, where does a complete novice get started? I think if you're not going to do any research, really, you have to do a little bit of research, right? But if you're not really going to do much and you want to really depend on sort of other services doing this for you, so to speak, and you don't feel as though you need to custody your own money, you're not a really serious libertarian or something along those lines, it's just a passive interest, and you think, okay, I'm watching this thing, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon, and it might be worth 1% of my portfolio, or it might be worth the asymmetric upside of that potential is something that I want to be exposed to. I don't want to just watch from the sidelines. If that's your interest and that's your framing, I think that there's only one that's interesting in Bitcoin, personally. I for years, that was the only one I was interested in. I did understand and knew that Ethereum was around, but ultimately what Ethereum is to me is it's sort of the internet. It's a blockchain. It's an internet. It's more like an internet than it is a store of value. And ETH, the native, the token of Ethereum, is a gas token. And if you're not going to be using Ethereum, then I don't understand why you would want to have ETH as an investment, because it's really a gas token you would be using on that network if you wanted to be doing transactions or rehypothecating your value in decentralized finance applications and things like that, or buying NFTs, which are much more speculative and they're very community driven. And if you're just a person who lives in the world and you're a student or you're going to a day job all day and you're not interested in hanging out in Discord and getting to know these communities, I think that there's really only one, and it's Bitcoin. And that's my take. And I'll leave it there. I've got a lot more to talk about.
Yeah. So is the question, what project should they look into first, or like where do they start in crypto?
So it's like, I think that I'm really just sort of addressing that. What does a complete novice get started with? So then there are several other sub questions, like, with no experience, what can I do tomorrow? Somebody said a step-by-step guide to get into the market. So we could talk more about how it is that I would get into Bitcoin, so to speak.
I like where your head's at. First step. So for Bitcoin, the use case that I see Bitcoin, the primary use case is, we've said it multiple times, peer-to-peer digital e-cash. So exactly. If you're a person who's interested in sending money to other people in a decentralized manner, I'd say, yeah, start at Bitcoin. But even more than that, start doing research, which there's not one perfect place to go to for research. You can just type Google, what is Bitcoin, and start going down a rabbit hole. I would go to the learning style. So if you like watching, or you're a visual learner through like videos, I would say go to YouTube, type in what is Bitcoin, Bitcoin explained in under 5 minutes. You can learn like that. If you like to read, if you Google it, there's multiple blogs that come out. If you're a podcast person, literally just search those terms, and that's in a very easy way. And for any other, if you want to look at a high level, just pick which way you learn and then type in what is Bitcoin, or Bitcoin explained, or crypto explained, or blockchain explained. I think those are distributed ledger technology explained. Those will get you on the right path as far as learning. And then I would say follow the thread that is most interesting to you. But I think the easy way to start is just in taking in all that information, and it is very easy to find your way down the mines of all the information.
Then the thing is, like, the network is open and free, and so you're going to find so much BS, so much stuff that's complete waste of time, and ultimately it's sort of it's unfortunately a part of the internet reality is that there's going to be crap with the gold, and there's going to be a lot more crap than there is gold. And I think that certain things that stand out for me, like I love on YouTube Whiteboard Crypto, great resource. That it's a very reminiscent of Khan Academy. I love watching Khan Academy videos when I've got high level questions about fundamental economics or fundamental mathematics or fundamental astronomy. Khan Academy is always my go-to. I love the way that they teach. And then Whiteboard Crypto is similar. I really like Whiteboard Crypto on YouTube. And they have a great newsletter as well that I really go to them on YouTube. And then Bitcoin.org is a great resource. I think that that's probably where I got started with Bitcoin back in the day as a result of that book. But there are thousands and thousands of websites, and Eric is by far my biggest, he's pushing me the hardest, but I'm close to hitting send on a Bitcoin blog post. So hopefully, and that's gonna be really high level with these sorts of people in mind. So hopefully that's something that I can maybe post in the comments or something like that in this video in the near future. But
I've got to press publish on that thing, guy.
Yeah, seriously, I've got a note here. Press publish.
Hey, there you go. I would take that point as well. We're in a huge wave of artificial intelligence that people are looking at, but you can go to ChatGPT. It's free right now. Chat.openai.com. Literally search what is Bitcoin, and then if there's something you don't understand in that, ask that question on it, and it'll take you for every part of it that you don't understand. Ask a question. You can prompt it to say, explain Bitcoin like I'm a 5-year-old. And then if it says something, if it says the word mining or blockchain, you can say, explain blockchain like I'm a 5-year-old. And it'll really break it down for you. So it's never been easier to get that information.
It's amazing. It's so true.
Yeah,
it's very, very true. I think, Chat GPT is a great resource for that reason. But ultimately, if your framing is that you don't want to do all of this research because you got a stack of textbooks next to you, or you just have a job and a family and you don't really care as much, but you think that there's potential you're interested. Yes, you're somehow watching this. I don't know why you would, because that's such a weird niche for you to be interested in this video. But if you are, I really think that Bitcoin is really the only one that is really designed to be with longevity in mind, that doesn't have a foundation behind it. Like Ethereum has the foundation, and so they run the nodes, and so there's sort of opaqueness around the decentralization of that. Whereas Bitcoin is something that is we'll talk about mining in a moment, but it's extremely popular from a global perspective. It's pervasive. It's the most popular cryptocurrency. When you're thinking about the asymmetric upside of the industry, if you think that the industry is going to crash and burn, I'm surprised you're watching this video. If you think that there is any potential upside at all, and you want to put 1% of your portfolio in this because you think, okay, well, there's potential for this. I don't think that there's any issue with taking a little bit of cash each month or each 6 months or once a year and putting a little bit into Bitcoin, even just a small amount, and being interested in seeing if there's an asymmetric upside in 10 years from now or 20 years from now. If it fails, that's okay. I would never, ever, ever invest in anything with money that I don't feel comfortable with losing. So that's one thing, obviously, to note. But if it's 1% and you're thinking about this as something that is just a speculative venture and you're interested in the space but you don't know where to get started, I would say start on a centralized exchange. We spoke about these last week. I think by far the one that has, in the United States where I live in New York, the one that's the easiest for me to use, like legislatively, the easiest for me to use, but also the one with a very reputable team that's doing a very good job. It's a public traded company. They have a lot of due diligence processes in place, which is not what you can say for every single centralized exchange or centralized player. They're also based in the United States. They've gone through all the rigmarole that goes along with that, which is the highest barometer for a lot of this legislation globally. And so I would use Coinbase, and I wouldn't even worry about taking it off, like putting it on chain or custodying it yourself if you're really just such a novice. Like if you're just putting $50 in a month or a couple $100 a year, or even if it's like $5,000 a year or something like that, I understand the concern. I'm the number one proponent for self-custody. We both probably have 10 hardware wallets. Like there are ways to self-custody that are relatively simple, but I wouldn't worry about it. Don't overcomplicate things. If you're keeping it on a centralized exchange, you're ultimately not going to be able to move across a border with it in your head with the seed phrase, as with the example we'd given a couple of weeks ago. I don't think that you're the target audience for that, obviously. It's fun to go through that rabbit hole in and of itself, but it's a whole other thing. Self-custody it's a very new process. It's like being your own bank. And unless you have the understanding of how to do that very effectively and responsibly, I wouldn't even mess with it. Like maybe a year in, by that point, you will have maybe acclimated a little bit more, know a little bit more about it. And then you want to take that ownership. Awesome. Like there'll be tons of times that we talk about how to self-custody things.
I wouldn't worry about it if you're a newbie. Yeah. I don't think you got to walk before you can run. And exactly. If you're just interested in dipping your toes in. But I think for learning, learn before you buy. Spend a good amount of
Yes.
time actually
Yeah.
understanding. And there's
Yeah.
really cool aspects. I mean, you make a good point talking about starting with Bitcoin. Pretty easy to understand. Capped at 23 million Bitcoins will only ever be created. And we're currently at 17 or 19 million. I can't exactly remember right now.
Yeah.
But there's also other
I think it's
facts.
21 million total, but yeah.
21.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not certain about that. I'm pretty sure.
21 or 23. Probably, I
Yeah.
think I'm mixing another token with that has 2 and 3 in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's easy things to understand. Understand it before you buy it, for sure.
True. Yeah, exactly. It's not like no, it's so true. That's a good point, I guess. And then I think that there's also an interesting question in here about like, with no experience, what can I do tomorrow? Step-by-step guide into the market. I think that there are literally, somebody else had asked, how do you pick the quality of cryptos when there are hundreds mined each day? Like, first and foremost, I wish that there was mining there are really interesting nuances when it comes to proof of work and proof of stake. And some of them, let's talk about proof of work. So proof of work is ultimately the mining mechanism, the validation mechanism behind Bitcoin. So Erica just said that there's a total supply of 21 million. It'll be completed. The mining will be exhausted by a little bit less than 100 years from now or so. Like, so in the year 2140 or 2120 or something like that is when it's supposed to be fully mined. And in the meantime, what needs to happen is there's a competition for those for those coins that are being mined that haven't yet been actually exhausted from the algorithm. So from the initial supply. And so what's happening there is they're literally proving the work with electricity, right? So these organizations are, there's this huge narrative. I hear a lot about it. It's one of the first questions I get, which is very weird to me because it's such a rabbit hole question that's been pulled out from the rabbit hole and put on top in headlines. But it abstracts away a lot of the interesting parts of this technology. But ultimately, that work is proved with electricity consumption, and so it then gets this bad rap for being energy intensive. And you hear stats around more energy consumption than an entire nation, and these interesting things. I think it's really very nuanced, and like everything, there are really immature and impractical ways to look at these things. I think that they're asking very weird questions. In reality, energy itself is not derived in the same way anywhere, really. So like there are multiple ways to derive energy, is my point. So you can do it from a coal-fired power plant, or on the other end of the spectrum, you can do it from a volcano and harnessing that. Actually, it's almost like hydroelectricity through a dam. That water is moving energy anyway, and you're harnessing that existing. So that's a renewable resource, obviously.
I think if crypto was called volcano money, it would have a much better. It would be much wider received. It's a cool name.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, they literally are mining Bitcoin in El Salvador with the power from they have a mining facility on the top of a volcano. It's unbelievably cool. It's so interesting. And so that is like negative. Yeah, it's very metal, or very, very punk rock. Very cool. But ultimately, I think that when it comes to, and I hate to be such a stickler, anybody who is really good friends with me, like Eric, knows that I'm not that my mind is a busy place. And so ultimately, I think that when it comes to energy itself, it's not one size fit all. If you're deriving energy from a coal-fired power plant down the road, it's a relatively carbon intensive process, whereas nuclear energy is much less carbon intensive. And then renewable energies actually can sequester carbon, as a matter of fact. So the opposite, they're actually sequestering carbon. So I think that the way that you derive that energy is a relevant conversation to have when you're speaking about Bitcoin mining. And if you then wanted to say, okay, let's really crack down on this, I think that the solution to this, Bitcoin isn't going anywhere. If the internet goes somewhere, if the internet is it just completely and totally wiped off the face of the planet, if you think that that is a possibility realistically, then sure, there's a chance that Bitcoin is going to also be completely and totally lost off the planet, because the presupposition for it is really the internet. If you think that that's unrealistic, which I think we probably both agree with a lot of solidity, like 99.9% likelihood that the internet's not going anywhere anytime soon, there's a chance that Bitcoin is going to continue. And there's a very high likelihood that there are going to be people who are interested in this. It's 15 years old now. There are people who are obsessed with it. And then there are people like us who are interested in it. And there are a lot of other people who know about it, but don't know really what it is. But it's internet native money is really what it is. And the fact that the mining operations are such that they are consuming a large amount of energy, I think that that's a validation in the idea that people want to participate in it, and the fact that it's a global internet native money that supersedes borders. It's not federally mandated by a government, and therefore not centralized through a government who can then say, oh, okay, you want to, you can't have it, you can't buy this time, like, oh, this money, or we're going to actually debase the currency. When I was in Zambia, they rebased the currency. They knocked 3 zeros off of it, and so a 1,000 kwacha note was then 1 kwacha worth. And that wasn't a very popular thing that had happened. That was very detrimental to a lot of wealth creation, and ultimately really negative. And that happens in Argentina. The inflation is unbelievable. I have a very close friend from there. In all over the world, there are these issues with central bank currencies. And I'm not saying that this is a solution to that, as much as it's an option that is different than those. And it was thought about it was presented as a solution to those federally mandated dollars in any one of a number of different forms. And that's actually in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, written there in the history of it on the blockchain. You can actually look at the first block and see some of these breadcrumbs, so to speak, that Satoshi had put in there in reference to the financial crisis and the rehypothecation of money with the mortgage crisis that came to light in 2008, and ultimately just trying to give people an opportunity for something else. I'm not a hardcore libertarian who thinks that this is the answer. I think it's an interesting option that has a non-zero chance of success. And if somebody wants to be involved in any way, I think that Bitcoin is by far the most interesting, without having to do a ton of research and ultimately maybe spend a lot of time on the internet that you don't have and don't want to do. You don't want to live in Discord and check out Ethereum communities and Hedera communities and Near communities. And these just aren't as interesting to you. You just want to have, like, you can do an automatic pay every month. You buy $10, whatever it is. I would really encourage it just to be Bitcoin personally. Sort of a huge rant there. It was like a 5-minute talk.
So in conclusion, you think that people should start off with Ethereum, right?
I think those are gas tokens, man. That's really what I think. That's not a popular opinion. Yeah, I think I get a lot of fun
out of in that, which is the one cool thing that people don't talk about, and you kind of touched on, was they talk about the network taking up a lot of energy, but people who have access to renewable energy, say people have solar power somewhere in Africa, they can run a mining operation, and that in turn gives them opportunity to, one, create this global network, but two, also earn fees and a living with a currency that is most likely more stable, as unstable as people think it is when they look at it as an investment, because they really are investing in it because they want it to go up. People who are in a very volatile situation with their government and currency, it's an appealing offer, and it's something that they can depend on because there's an entire network of people around the globe doing it. So the fact that it takes up a lot of energy is a positive in that regard, as far as I see it.
Yeah, the fact that there are miners competing means that there is an algorithm built into in the white paper. You can read about it, and it's the mathematical section, one of them, and it talks about how, as the more miners enter and try to compete to actually get those, there's a 10-minute heartbeat for Bitcoin, and every 10 minutes there is a mining process that takes place. And ultimately, when that 10-minute happens, there are these different miners across the globe. And very famously, China has banned mining, which actually makes Bitcoin mining more centralized, which is against the ethos of Bitcoin, ironically, or I guess maybe not, just interestingly. And so if, like, the United States, for example, makes it illegal to mine Bitcoin, it's just going to move those miners elsewhere is the point. It's not really going to nip it in the bud, so to speak, because this is something that has been introduced as a currency in at least one nation. Many other nations that are much more nascent are thinking about something similar. I was reading recently about very large nations as well, like Brazil, thinking about it. And that doesn't mean that it would usurp its current. It just would be an option. I think that this is an interesting thing. The internet is new. Yeah. Internet native money is new, and it's an idea worth at least thinking about. It's not worth sort of squashing. I think it's fascinating at a high level.
Yeah. And I think we don't have to go into it now, but explaining blocks and mining is probably important, but that's more of like a specific of how a blockchain works, or like a decentralized blockchain. But I think we have time. If we get into another one, there's another good question in there, right?
Yeah, there are a ton. I think, so to tie a bow on the mining, I think that it's a process that creates new Bitcoins. The process will end at a certain point, because there's a number of Bitcoins beyond which you cannot. There are no more than 21 million. So it ultimately creates new Bitcoins, and it incentivizes miners to secure the network and maintain the integrity of the blockchain. That's really what the mining process is. And you don't have to be a miner to have Bitcoin, right? So this is something that's abstracted to third parties, and they compete for it at a very high scale. So it's not really something that you need to worry about. But when it comes to mining and the energy consumption, fascinating conversation. It depends on where you are. It's like having a Tesla and being very proud and virtue signaling about the fact that you have an electrical vehicle. We both drive the same car. We both drive pickup trucks, but so we don't have electric vehicles, excuse me. And ultimately, when somebody has a Tesla, it's like virtue signaling. I think that they're missing the point in that it depends on where their electricity is being derived from. And so if they're living in a state or living in a place where they're still deriving their electricity from the grid in a way that's carbon intensive, like coal or any one of a number of different ways that's not renewable, it's honestly funny to me, because that's the more important question to ask. So that's a little bit. I think that's a hot take that might ruffle feathers. I don't mean it that way as much as I think everything's a little bit deeper and more there's more to analyze than headlines, I think. So mining is not something you need to worry so much about, because in reality it's securing the network, which is really good. If you have any interest in getting, even $5 of it, you want it to be secure. So somebody had asked about mining. How do you pick through the quality of cryptos when there are hundreds each day? That's something I think we kind of covered, right? I think that the vast majority.
Let's dig into that one a little bit. Like, how do you, let's say you're investing in crypto and you're like excited, do you want to see new projects and you're interested in learning more about them? Okay. What is the way you would find them? Because it's there are all these niche communities, micro communities, and tokens that represent them and do different things. So I have opinions on this. I think I would say figure out.
Like last week, we spoke a lot about it, I think.
About finding projects.
Yeah, well, I just think I thought you were going to say CoinMarketCap, honestly. Like that's like the number one place I would look first.
I wouldn't really find them that way, though. I mean, I would start by figuring out what you like what you're interested in. If you're interested in, same, with Bitcoin, if you're interested in, a global decentralized currency that you can send money and carry money and transport it in your brain, definitely lean into that one. That's an easy one to find and figure out your likes there. For me, part of it was I was into art, which took me to Ethereum and started actually using it and buying the things that I liked, which led to other Ethereum communities. And then there were times where I was trying to earn increased interest, which led me to DeFi. So I was like, what can make a good investment? And so then you start researching those, and then you kind of need to figure out the qualities of a good project, which is maybe a little bit of a harder skill set to hone, like knowing how to research a team. You definitely want a team where you can figure out the real names. That it's called being doxed on the internet, but the actual legal names of the people that are attached to the project. You want to know how the team's funded, how they make money, almost like a business. I would ask the same questions you ask a business. How are you making money? What is your product or service? Who are the people you're serving? How are you building your product? What is the game plan for doing this? What are you planning on doing? And a lot of times, if that information isn't that super accessible, you sometimes have to do some digging. A lot of these projects are like small scale startup companies. So you do have to go, and it's very easy to find the teams and ask the questions, but I would start by identifying what you like for the most part.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective. It's like, if you have an idea that's something that you'd be interested in, like, where do you even start though? I think that ultimately, I think of CoinMarketCap as being a list of all of it's a ranking of the market cap. So the total money that people have put into these currencies, top to bottom. And there are literally 8,000 more, 9,000. There are thousands and thousands and thousands and more being created every single day. And then there are probably lots of them that are created every single day that are not even added to CoinMarketCap because they're actually just scams and BS. And so I think, if you look at the top 50 there, if you open the page, I think it has at least 50 in front of you, maybe 100. Bitcoin's number one, Ethereum's number two, and then the rest are, there are a lot of really interesting projects, absolutely. But it is a good point. If you're not interested in actual, the monetary the monetary aspect of it, Bitcoin's not your player, right? And you might want to be, if you are interested in art. There is this new interesting thing happening on Bitcoin with NFTs, but it's so nascent. It's not worth even really talking about here, as much as Ethereum is really like the mecca for NFTs, but it's expensive. And so then you're looking at almost every network has its own NFT sort of marketplaces and then communities. Some are more niche than others, but they're all very similar. I'm not sure how you would like.
Well, yeah, I
That's not
would
my
say, most people aren't going to want to go buy what they're called profile picture NFTs. That's like an
yeah,
insider crypto thing. If you're into fine art, literally just start Googling fine art NFTs. If you like video games, you can do blockchain video games. I would do
sure.
research that way rather than going chain specific, because it'll
That's a
be
good point.
easier to start. But then using the same kind of framework where you look at it like a regular company. But
Yeah,
there's other parts too. There's a really cool DAO called Vita DAO that's working on like longevity research and stuff like that. They just got funded
cool.
by a bunch of people, and there's a big name behind it. I think Pfizer was one of the backers of it. But it's a DAO
Wow.
working, so like research DAOs. There's a really cool DAO called Information DAO that's like analysts. That's really expensive to get into. Nobody can get into that. But
Yeah,
if
yeah,
there's specific things that you like you like golf, these all are all kind of going towards NFTs, because I think the things that people are interested in the real world, people are creating NFT based DAOs or decentralized organizations where they can vote and have ownership over things. But
do you know about LinksDAO? Do you know LinksDAO?
yeah, Links DAO,
Yeah,
where they're building a
that's
golf
yeah,
course and everybody who
yeah.
has an
They're buying a
NFT
golf course.
gets access. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, they're buying a golf course, and everybody who owns an NFT is a member at the club. So it's like a traditional country club model. So it's not anything new. In the same way that co-ops are very similar to DAOs when you think about it functionally. Like I go and I contribute to a co-op here in Brooklyn, and I work, and I then get access to cheap groceries, and I can't bring somebody who is not a member. And so
Yeah.
I have an ID card, but it's effectively like an NFT. Like if I lose it, they can replace it. But if I had an NFT, it could be a digital version of that, sort of like a verifiable identity, and that would be on chain. So I could, just check the blockchain. I wouldn't have to worry about
Yeah.
custodying it necessarily. But yeah, it's interesting. And LinksDAO is
You
like the
resell
exact same
it,
thing
you
as
could
a country
lend it
club.
out too. Yeah, there's some
Yeah,
cool
yeah,
things.
exactly. So if I left for a month, and yeah, exactly, I could sell it or rent it for a month. Exactly, it's
Yeah.
fascinating.
You can take a loan on it too. I mean, not
Yeah,
that you would need that for that, but
yeah,
there's cool things there. And I think with the golf thing, it just opens up an interesting opportunity. And I see, so if you're interested in weird niche things, I guess you kind of have to have some hobbies first.
yeah.
But
It's true.
if you have hobbies, somebody's building something in there. So there's some fun stuff.
It's a good point. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I wasn't thinking about the answer from that perspective. I'm just like, so Bitcoin, 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 Bitcoin. Trying to get that out of my head. It's the way I've been for a long time. That's a really good point. And then just to tie a bow on that, decentralized autonomous organizations are what we're talking about. That's like the name we were using, DAO. And I think that DAOs are, they're in the same way that mining can be sort of abstracted and made to seem very complicated. DAOs are really just sort of they're a community of people who are trying to work toward one singular goal. And so they're a lot like organizations, but they're ideally decentralized, which is impractical in my experience. You really do need a decision maker in order to actually get anything done. But that's what's literally happening in real time in the space. Is a lot of DAOs are saying that they're DAOs, and in reality, they're companies.
Yeah.
But this is a learning experience, right? Not every company is a co-op.
Yeah.
Certain companies should be a co-op, and it allows for them certain, all sorts of interesting nuances. I'm not really sure, from a tax perspective or all sorts of things organizationally as well. But when it comes to, you might want to have a C corp or an LLC in comparison as to having, founding a co-op, a cooperative. In the same way, I think that a lot of these DAOs are really just like, oh, we need to be a DAO. That's what you do when you're blockchain building. It's like, no, that's not really the point when you think about it. Like a DAO, I think of as being in line or parallel to open source development with software, but Google and Facebook and Amazon all have proprietary sort of languages that they also use. Go for Google, JavaScript, or a derivative of JavaScript that was built in-house at Facebook. I'm forgetting the name of it. React. And then, there are all these different sort of software languages that are then become open source, but are built by companies. And those communities then kind of branch out from the companies. And so it doesn't, DAO this, DAO that. I think it's really just sort of like it's almost, I don't know. I think there are too many DAOs. It's very ineffective.
There's too many DAOs. I agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there will be more. I think that, I'm more of a
Yeah,
fan of smaller scale DAOs where people can make decisions. Like, I don't think a token that has a billion tokens that are all governance tokens where people have a vote and then there's no votes happening. I don't know if that's necessarily as good as a group of 30 people all having a token and having a vote on things and being able to make small scale decisions is exciting for me. And I think probably it's a better use case for some of the governance stuff.
It's a good point. Yeah. I know that there's also Joke DAO, which is like an aggregator of jokes. It's just so funny. I love following them on Twitter. That's a really interesting, like there are a lot of really interesting new ideas that are happening as a result of this new structure. DAOs, they're not very well regulated. It's a lot of opaqueness when it comes to how it is that they're regulated. Some people are saying we should actually adopt co-op like precedents when it comes to cooperative foundings, or like the legislation around co-ops. And that's interesting, but it doesn't really regulation, man. I know. Well, I'm just thinking about like, I just think that DAOs are actually distinct from cooperatives, but most of the DAOs now that are DAOs really could reframe themselves as cooperatives and be very effective because they're not actually decentralized or autonomous. But then there are these novel organizations that are really, really interesting. But there's, in the same way that there are thousands of cryptocurrencies and maybe 20 or 50 or 100 that are interesting, there are probably more than that are interesting, but it is ultimately just a matter of time and not being able to research them all. Same thing with DAOs. There are probably thousands and thousands, and there are probably 50 that are really effective, and maybe not even that many.
I think they really fucked up when they put autonomous in the name. Decentralized autonomous. Yeah. Like no organization's going to run on its own, really. They should have just gone with like decentralized organizations where
I think it has to do with smart contracts, right? So like the ability for it to be permissionless.
Where you can vote permissionlessly. It's tough to make it actually automated with a lot of the stuff that you need with day-to-day things. Like definitely. I guess maybe the tech will rise up to meet it, which would be awesome.
If the idea would be like but like if you have a community of 3,000 people and one person puts up a vote for like on the governance forum, this place where you all sort of vote together with the tokens that allow for you to have that vote, which you've spoken about governance tokens several times already. And not everybody agrees. And then there's this huge discourse in the comments. It's really interesting to see that. It's funny. And it's not funny. It could be very, very substantive, but it can be very ineffective to have 3,000 people all arguing about something. It's very, I think that the idea, though, is that if the governance, I think theoretically, the governance is posted, people vote, it goes yes or no. And if it's yes, it automatically triggers an action. Or if it goes no, it automatically doesn't trigger an action. So that's where the automation comes in, just to be like, just for context for people who don't know how smart contracts work.
Exactly. And there's some things that I think can't be put on smart contracts that hopefully will in the future, which would be cool.
Like digital identity is such a great use case. I know that the DMV in California is working on something around, I think actually you shared that with me a couple of weeks ago. The DMV is working on that in California. There are some incredible things. I recently had like a fire sermon in front of my sister about like the fact that when I go into a bar, like I have to show my ID. My ID has my address, my name, my birthday, my eye color, my height, whether or not I have a motorcycle license, organ donor, my signature. I don't necessarily want this bouncer. And like, it's like, this is theoretical. I don't really care, but I think it's interesting. Like, does that person need to know all of that information? Absolutely not. They need to know whether or not I'm 21 in New York or wherever it is you could be my different age. And so really it's a binary yes or no. And so, do they need that? Absolutely not. Are they, if I could instead validate that I am without telling them the actual date or the year or my actual age, would that be better? Maybe. Interesting to think about. Maybe that's more effective. How is it that we can do that? Digital identity could allow for that. So there could be this sort of thing where you grant access to the information. You can cryptographically with confidence say, yes, I am, and they can actually validate that you are without actually seeing the details of it. I think that is a fascinating use case that is kind of abstract and hard to wrap your head around at a high level, but it's one of the most interesting things around digital identity that we're going to see roll out pretty much inevitably, only because organizations are already working on this and they're just not really talking about it publicly, but it's being worked on by a lot of governments and a lot of logistical organizations as well. the ability for you to withhold a lot of your personal identifying information and not have to always have it available. And that will then mitigate the risk of a lot of these hacks and these, things like Cambridge Analytica, very famously with Facebook several years ago, and then GDPR as a result of that sort of cascading into like, all right, we need to protect consumers. This allows for us to give that custody of the information, not of money or any sort of value or gas tokens, but the custody of your own information, your data, which is really fascinating. I think that really when you think about the context of the internet, it's like, okay, we're only 30 years into this interesting experiment with people on the internet. Like in 100 years from now, this is going to be very different, I can imagine.
Yeah, 100%. And this technology allows that, which is really cool. I don't think a lot of people sleep on it and they're like, oh, it's a bunch of scam tokens. It's like, no, that what you're talking about, zero knowledge proofs, are really cool and are very high level tech stuff that one day you'll be able to pay for something with a credit card without them having to know the address of your credit card. Or basically you can just prove that, I prove to somebody else that this is my form of payment, so I don't have to give you all the information. Is really cool.
Yeah,
and there will be thousands of ways that people can use that.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, and it has nothing to do with money. Like I think people get the biggest application of cryptocurrency right now is DeFi and decentralized finance, and then like the store of value component. But there are so many other parts that are the most interesting pieces that are going to be more widely adopted potentially, and have maybe even far-reaching. I don't know. It depends on who you are. If you're unbanked, it might be nice to have an opportunity to save money. But for a lot of other people, maybe at a global level, some of the changes won't be financial. They'll be more in the personal identifying information, the custody of your own data, and then business applications are fascinating too. But all right, we're 36 minutes in. Do you have a hot take?
Oh shit, you go first. I'll think of one.
I think that one thing I was thinking about this morning is that I'm consistently, I love people. I'm very much of a people person, but I'm also introverted. So I like to spend, I'll spend a couple of days alone without even batting an eye. But I go to the same bodega for bacon, egg, and cheese a couple of days a week or a couple of days a month at least when I'm in town, when I'm at my apartment. And the guy who I ordered them from is this, he's like very mellow, very pragmatic. And, I go in there and he's like, what do you want? And I tell bacon, egg, and cheese, salt, pepper, ketchup on a roll, just the classic New York City order. And I go in a couple of days a week, and he's just always been so gruff with me, and it's absolutely fine. We're transacting, like I'm paying for the service, perfect. But I love that, that idea. And then the other day he pops out and he makes my sandwich, pops out, and I was like, oh, I'm glad I caught you before you left. I said, oh, I'll be right back. Every morning I walk to the corner and I bring the same woman her bacon, egg, and cheese, because it would take her 25 minutes to walk from the corner to here with her walker. And she had been doing that for months, but ultimately I realized that she's just around the corner when I was asking her, and now I've come and deliver it to her. It's like, this guy I thought was gruff and angry, and he's like the sweetest man in the world. And all it took was just a simple question, or just like just a comment, and then he opened up. It's just the sweetest thing in the world. So people, no matter how wronged you might feel, I think that people are at the base of it just so they can be so sweet.
There you go. Hot take, slice of humanity. Get out there. I have one. Yeah, I love that. My hot take is going to be, I recently got back from the Cayman Islands for 4 days. It's February, and even though I'm in the southern part of the U.S., it gets cold. So my hot take will be, it's worthwhile to plan a southern trip during the wintertime because it's nice to go get a bunch of sun. It's basically the summertime there, and I just spent the 4 days in the summer, which was amazing. I think it's a good way to recharge your batteries, and you might get a little sick for a few days, but that is worth it.
It's worth it. Yeah, exactly. Nice, man. Well, your 10 looks great. Well done. Cool, man. Well, thanks for tuning in. We want to give a shout out. We have same tunes every week. Lo-Fi Leopards, which is an NFT project on Avalanche, native to Avalanche, and Noah put those together. So we appreciate him. Or no, not Noah. Excuse me. I have his name.
Josiah Soren.
Josiah Soren. Yeah, exactly. Good call. So shout out to Josiah and Lo-Fi Leopards, and thanks for tuning in. Send us some questions if you have any. We'd love to keep at least do one question. It could be fun. It'd make it more useful. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it, everybody.